All right, so now that we've got our whole image organized, it's time to start cutting our puzzle pieces out. So for the plume, I know I don't need most of this sky out here. I might use a little bit of this mountain ridge, but I don't want all of these clouds back here. So I'm going to use the Lasso Tool. And selection tools are kind of the key to Photoshop. So to make sure I get a good selection, I'm using a tablet. I'm going to zoom in using Command+, hold down the space bar, kind of swoop over. And now it's going to take you a little bit of practice, especially if you're new to a tablet. But the way the Lasso Tool works in CS6 is it selects from the tip of the black triangle. So that is where you're cutting. And I'm just going to cut right outside of what I want. Give it a little bit of a border, like a sticker's edge. Select around the things I want to delete. And then if it's a rasterized layer, I can just delete that away. And remember, you're cutting from the tip of the black triangle. That took me a little getting used to switching from CS5. Now this portion will probably be covered up in my composition, so I'm going to leave that in for now. Now when you want to deselect, you can always click outside of your selection, but sometimes you're not even sure what's selected. And so something that's always nice to know is you can always deselect by doing Command D, and that will deselect a selection as well. Okay, then I'm going to use the Move tool again, move my plume into the right place, take the opacity down a little bit. Don't worry if your sketch isn't perfect. You're modifying it now. For instance, in my sketch, you'll see that the kind of the line of the background there of the horizon is sloping down, whereas this has it sloping up. And I like it sloping down a little bit more. So I can modify this in other ways. I can transform it, Command T, right click or control check within it, and then flip the negative. And I kind of like how that works. So feel free to modify these as any way that you see fit. Kind of move it into place. Now I'm going to take its opacity down so I can see my sketch. Okay. Next element. Now before I go too much further, I want to make sure I save it as a PSD, and it's no longer the sketch. This is now my assignment. So this is going to be Carl Fry, Assignment 1, Fantasy Landscape. You can name it anything you like as long as you have your name in it and you're able to recognize what it is. And it might take a little bit of time to save because we're dealing with, close to a gigabyte worth of data. But you can keep working on it as you're going. Now, because I've set the name of the file, anytime I feel like I don't want to lose the information, I can just hit Command S, which is the same as just saving it as you go. Command S. All right, next, let's do this bridge. Kind of put it in place. Sometimes you'll have to move the layer on top of the stack so that you can see it clearly. And I'm going to cut it out. Now I'm going to show you another selection method here. So the lasso is kind of your hands-on selection tool. And it works pretty well. But this is a nice open field. And I can select all of that by using what's called the Magic Wand tool. A lot of people like the Quick Selection tool. It tries to kind of guess what you're after. And they've done a lot of improvements to it. And in that case, it worked really well. But it can be a little difficult to control. So that's using the Quick Selection tool to kind of cut out these elements. So you can try that. Or, I'll go back a little bit. My favorite, because it seems pretty rational and pretty easy to understand, is the Magic Wand. So it's right under the lasso, along with the Quick Selection tool. And the Magic Wand you can set to to pick any pixels that are similar to each other, either touching, which is if contiguous is checked, it will only select the ones that are touching, or anywhere in the layer. So if it's not contiguous, it will be anywhere. And then you set the tolerance. So how similar do the pixels need to be? And 32 is the default, and 32 seems to work pretty well. So at 32, it selects everything up here. Then these were just a little too dark. But I can hold down Shift, and I can add to the selection. And get all of it. So that does a really nice job too, and it's a little bit more understandable. So remember that Shift will always add to a selection, even if you're just using the lasso. So if I've selected this and then I want to select something else, I hold down Shift, you get a little plus sign, do this, and then if I want to subtract from a selection, I can hold down Option. I'll get a little minus sign and I can cut away. And you can do that with any of the selection tools. So modifying selections is a really important lesson to learn. And we'll get better and better at it. Okay, now, because this edge might actually show up, I'm just going to soften it a little bit. I don't want any hard edges for no reason. And this black edge, I don't know if I even want that. So I'm going to loop around it, delete those, maybe soften some of these elements. All right, that becomes especially important as your elements are more and more in the foreground. Now I'm going to take the opacity of that layer down. And if I want to see what I have, there's a few things I can do. I can turn off my sketch, and I'm actually going to double click my background layer, turn it to layer 0, make another layer, fill that layer with white, so just the white paper, and put that behind everything. So that if I want to, I can just turn off my sketch and kind of see what I've got so far, even at a low opacity. All right, so I want this cliffside next. I'm going to use the Move tool with Auto Select on. I'm going to move that in. I'm going to have to transform this a little bit smaller to fit into my composition. I'm also working from the background forward, right? And I love organic elements like this, like mountains and ice and trees, because I can transform them without them losing their communication. And then I can move that layer up to the top. And I'm going to keep that cloud in there for now, but I might soften this selection here so it's not so hard-edged. There's a little person there I don't want, so I'm just going to soften this bottom. This can be tricky, trying to decide what you want and what you don't want. But I know I don't want a hard horizontal. Okay? Take that down. Now once I have all of my main elements in, then I can take the opacity up again, and then I don't really need my sketch anymore. Okay, now I need the frozen lake. Which components do I want of this? Basically, just the lake part. The other way you can select is to select what you want instead of what you don't want, and then go up to Select Inverse, and it will select everything else, and then delete. So you can invert your selections too, which can sometimes be very helpful. This gets tucked into here. I'm going to just lengthen that lake a little bit so it looks like we're looking down on it a little bit more. Take that opacity down. And now I'm getting into my true foreground elements, the whale bones. That whale looks a little skinny to me, so I'm just going to transform him up a bit. Again, organic shapes you can do that kind of thing with, and it doesn't hurt their read. Even shorten him a bit. But I have a lot of hard edges here I'm going to have to work with. So I'm just going to first do a rough cut. These rocks might be useful. Like that. Okay. Now, I'm going to take my opacity up on all my layers. I'm going to turn off my sketch. You can also type in the opacity if that's faster for you, but I like to use the sliders. Sometimes you can just scroll over them and they'll go up as well, if you have a scroll mouse. There's various ways. All right, so now this is what I'm working with. And if I turn my sketch on, it kind of shows me each component and how I want them to work together. And I have some obvious problems here, but this is step one, so I'm going to make sure to save it. The problems I have are where the overlaps are keeping elements from coming through. So now what I'm going to do, I can use the move tool, and now that I'm seeing it at 100%, I can start positioning them a little differently. Don't feel too married to the composition of your sketch. That was a good starting place, but you might make much better decisions now. And you'll find edges that you really need to deal with. So for instance, I could cut away this edge, or I can just move that layer behind the ice bridge layer. But not so far behind that this one falls through. So let me see. So maybe I need to move that layer back more. And then bring the other ones forward. Remember, use your move tool. That will help you know what's what. Okay. So now I'm going to save it, and I'm going to think about the different kind of transitions between each of these. Right now I just have all these hard edges, and some of them are working better than others. Like this transition isn't all that bad. There's some lighting and some coloring issues that are needed. But in this mountain line, it could kind of work. I could see working with it to get it to work. It's going to require a lot of erasing, and erasing at a full opacity, but with a soft-edged brush. Pretty large soft-edged brush. And I'll show you what I mean with this cloud here. So I'm going to be on my plume layer. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to take that cut line that I used before, and you decide what size is best for you. What's great about the tablet is the harder you press, the more of that circle gets filled. And you can start blending some of these edges and refining them. This is before we're adjusting lighting and color.